Ray, her husband, was here this evening, and also who the honoree is this evening, and that is Megan Staples. So at this moment, I'd like to call up the awardees, Mary Truxell, Ray, and Doreen, if you wouldn't mind coming up. And while they're coming up, I'd like to give you a little background of Betsy Carter. So Betsy Carter was one of the most outstanding mathematics educators in Connecticut for over 50 years. She was a great teacher, a noted author of instructional materials, and Hamlin's mathematics curriculum leader for many years. She's the only person who ever served as president of both the Atomic Organization, leading organization of mathematics teachers in Connecticut, as well as the CCLM, our organization, as president for many years. CCLM established the Betsy Carter Award for Mathematics Leadership immediately following her untimely passing in 2015 to honor an educator who exemplifies the award's namesake, a passionate and compassionate leader who advocates for excellence in mathematics education across the state, who had a great influence on teachers and students in the mathematics community. So to that end, I'm going to now turn this over to Mary Truxell, who's going to, Mary Truxell, who's going to give you a little background information on our awardee. Thank you.
So it is, I have notes because I'm nervous. So it is my honor today to introduce the recipient of the Betsy Carter Memorial Award for Mathematics Leadership, my colleague and my friend, Megan Staples. Megan beautifully exemplifies the spirit of the Betsy Carter Award. She clearly exhibits, as Walter said, outstanding leadership and contributions to the mathematics education community in the state of Connecticut and well beyond. I begin with a disclaimer. In the time we have today, it is impossible to list all of Megan's accomplishments and contributions. So if I leave something out that's close to your heart, my apologies. As I look around the room, I know there are many people whose professional practice and lives have been positively impacted by Megan's work, her dedication, and her friendship. And of course, there are many beyond this room as well. As I talk just a bit about some of Megan's accomplishments and contributions to math education, I'll expect to see smiles and nods from people who have had the opportunity to work with her in some capacity or other, and for many of you in many situations. I'll begin with Megan's academic background, where she is certainly no slouch. She earned her undergraduate degree from Brown University and her master's and her PhD from Stanford University. She taught mathematics in Massachusetts and California. She was an assistant professor at Purdue University in Indiana. And in 2006, we in Connecticut had the wonderful fortune of having her come to UConn. So currently, Megan is an associate professor of mathematics education in the NEAG School of Education. She is an exemplary teacher, advisor, scholar, and colleague. She encourages and inspires her math education students, undergraduates, graduate students, doctoral students, master's and doctoral students. During her time at UConn and well beyond, and I'm seeing nods, she encouraged excellence, equity, and ongoing professional growth well beyond the classroom and university. For example, she arranges math field trips, participation in Atomic and NCTM conferences, and she presents and publishes with many of her students and former students, as well as practicing teachers. She's a consistent advocate for excellence in mathematics education, has been and continues to be actively involved with many state and national organizations. She's currently the president of AMTEC, the Association of Math Teacher Educators in Connecticut, where she's helping teachers, math educators, inspiring those who teach math teachers. She was an executive board member of CCLM. She's an active and contributing member of many other organizations, NCTM, Atomic, AMTE, I can name lots and lots of initials. She has been a leader and facilitator of professional development and research projects in schools and districts in Connecticut and beyond. For these projects, she not only talks the talk, but she walks the walk. She teaches, spends time in school, collaborates, raises the level of discourse about mathematics education, and conducts research. Another very important point is her strong stance toward sharing collaborative work, so that teachers and students beyond the project may also benefit. I encourage you to check out links on her UConn webpage to find some of the amazing resources that she has helped to compile and make publicly available. I'm going to mention just a few projects and initiatives, and again, my apologies for ones I leave out. So she's currently working on STEM and high school reform initiatives. There are people in the room who I know participated in the Bridging Math Practices Among Connecticut Mathematics Educators project. Lots of great materials came from that. The Math Leadership Academy, and I see familiar faces, the Jaguar Project, the Math Access Project, the Yukon Math Learning Discourse Project, and it can go on and on. Others have recognized Megan's contributions. For example, Atomic awarded her the Robert A. Rosenbaum Award in 2016, and the National Councils of Teachers of Mathematics awarded her and her co-authors the Linking Research and Practice Outstanding Publication Award for the article Moving Students to the Y that she published along with former students and practicing teachers. And speaking of publications, Megan has published many, many articles and book chapters. Along with her stellar scholarly reputation, her publications beautifully bridge the potential divide between research and practice. Related to this, as I said, she has collaborated on publications with students, former students, practicing teachers, and university colleagues. And we're all the better for working with her. She raises the level of discourse, thought, and practice. Megan has presented many, many times at academic and practitioner conferences in Connecticut, across the US, and internationally. And I won't bother to name all the places because there's lots of them. She's a tireless advocate for mathematics education and the embodiments of excellence, tenacity, collaboration, and dedication. She has helped so many of us to deepen our discourse, understanding, commitment, and practice related to so many important issues. For example, mathematical argumentation and justification, mathematical language, issues of equity, connections to STEM initiatives, and rich mathematical content and pedagogy, again, to name just a few. Megan continues to press us to think about important issues. For example, today, after she's presented with her award, she will share with us a talk entitled, What's Next for Math Education, Broadening the Conversation to Math for Citizenship. And on top of all of this, Megan is a caring and compassionate person and a really good friend. Although we were really sad to lose Betsy, the amazing mathematics leader who we memorialize with this award, I know Betsy would be proud to have Megan Staples receiving this award in her name. And I'm honored to introduce our 2019 Betsy Cotter Memorial Award recipient, Dr. Megan Staples.
So congratulations to Megan. We're going to now turn it over to her and enjoy your presentation for the evening. Thank you very much.
Do I need the mic if I talk this loud? No? Okay. All right, just let me know if I wane or something like that. So, first of all, thank you so much, and thank you to CCLM. I am honored and humbled, and I'm not really sure who Mary was talking about. It's really quite overwhelming, so thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I want to thank CCLM as an organization in this state. I think it was one of the first organizations I really got involved with once I got here, and I think that it really embodies the leadership qualities and bringing people together constantly and networking with other organizations. So thank you, and thank you for the award. And I knew Betsy, and she was just a force of nature. And so if anybody knew her and understood her, it's a true honor to have an award that is meant to represent who she was. So it was really, really touching for me. Thank you. So on to this stuff. I'm going to just set a timer, so because that will get us through to dinner. I believe. So when John contacted me and said, well, you can either do a little talk, 10 minutes or whatever, or you can do a long talk, 45 minutes, I said, okay, well, will we still have the same amount of time to eat and discuss and have dessert? And when he assured me the answer was yes, I said, okay, I'd love to do the long talk. So I take this as an opportunity to try out ideas. I was sort of given carte blanche, and so I'm going to play with these ideas with you. So I am going to start with a disclaimer, and that disclaimer is enter at your own risk. So I'm not sure everyone will love this talk or like this talk, but I think part of my job is to maybe throw out some ideas that aren't fully baked yet, and so you're not going to walk out of here with some definitive things to do at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. But I'm hoping that we walk out with having had some really productive conversations and with some ideas about, new ideas percolating that maybe we can act on in the future. So that's my goal. I'm inviting you to play in this sandbox with me. That's what I think about here. I want to play in this sandbox and see what we can build. And I figure you've all read the description and you all showed up, so you're kind of here by choice, except for my husband. He's maybe the only one not here by choice. But hopefully all the ideas will help us have some good conversations. This is in the genre of what I think is sort of a push towards thinking about high school mathematics. So John has started a high school reform committee. I know some of you have volunteered for the subcommittees. And NCTM has put out this catalyzing change in high school mathematics with the key subtitle there, initiating critical conversations. So I see this as part of these critical conversations. We need to think about what we're doing and how to move it forward, because we're not yet doing right by all students, and we have a lot of work to do. So that's kind of the push, the space that I think that we're sitting in right now. The space we're also sitting in right now is the high school graduation requirements are going to change next year, and it's going to move away from saying 3 credits of math to saying 9 credits of science and technology, and I'm sorry if that's a little small for folks in the back. So I take this as a call towards breaking down the silos, that's what we're trying to do now. So if it's 9 credits in STEM, we're really thinking more integrated. We want to think bigger, we want to think more connected, we want to maybe think more in terms of application. When I think STEM, I think a lot of application or working on problems together. So I'm going to try and offer some thoughts along these lines. So my goals today during our playtime, to explore this new sandbox in math education, thinking about the citizenship, and I want to just put a little wedge and maybe open that door a little bit. I want us to think about the current context, how this all fits in with society, Connecticut, what's going on, and I'm hoping to prompt generative conversations about possibilities that can continue over the dinner table and beyond. So I'm going to start by trying to outline sort of the space for what I think are kind of the purposes of math education. A lot of the talk these days is in terms of college and career readiness. So that's the big push, that's what Common Core is defined as, and that's pretty well established. So I'm not going to be talking in that sandbox, but we know what can be built there. We're still working on it, but we have some semblance of what happens there. The next place or space that I think we sort of try to say, okay, what's the purpose of math education? Well, it's kind of along the lines of empowerment. We want students to leave secondary school. We want them to be able to manage their daily lives, their investments, their finances, their healthcare, all those personal decisions that they might need in their daily lives. And some are more complex than others. So I see that as the second sort of place or sandbox. So we could be college and career readiness is why we do math ed. We could be for individual empowerment and independence. We could go there. Or this is the third space, and this is what I want to talk about today, thinking about math for citizenship. So if we think about math education and society, we require students on taxpayers' dime to go to school for 10 years. Right? So what's the benefit? There better be a good benefit for society, because that's a pretty big price tag, right? And indeed, schooling should contribute to our society. It should help us sustain our democratic ideals and pursue them in an even better way if we're not doing them well enough yet. So that's the third sandbox there, and that's where I'm going to spend a lot of time today. So I've outlined it just a little bit differently, but I think the only thing I'll add here is the college and career readiness can be thought about as societal. It's to train a STEM workforce, which could help our society and our economy and so on and so forth. It's also individual. The health and wealth of the individual family is very much about that unit. It's the individual unit, the family unit, and then this advance the democracy, sustain and advance democracy. Okay, so welcome to Math for Citizenship. What aspects of citizenship need math? And then we can flip the question. And what aspects of math are most helpful for citizenship? So grab a partner, swing them around and around, offer a couple ideas. I'll just give you 1 minute. Brainstorm a little bit. Okay, and I'll pull you back up here. Let me just take 3 responses, so 3 ideas on either question. What aspects of citizenship need math, and what aspects of math are most helpful for citizenship? Can I get 3 responses? Some ideas, any ideas?
We talked about informed decision making for what aspects of citizenship need math. If you're reading the paper, you ought to be able to understand what that means, what the data is, and how it's derived, and what the implications are.
Fabulous. Okay, great. Very good. Yes.
We talked about being able to plan for savings and taxes and housing.
Great.
I missed something, college.
Okay, right. Good, because in our society, we don't have free education necessarily. We're not Dubai that gives everyone $30,000 a year or what have you. So in our society, given the constraints, we have to do that. One more idea. So, yes?
Problem solving, mindset.
Okay. Okay, good. Yes, for all kinds of reasons. All right, great. So as I started thinking about these questions, I tried to break it down and think about, okay, what are my obligations as a citizen? And we can always opt out. We have an opt-out society, so I don't have to do things like voting. But at age 18, doesn't matter who you are, whether you got a C- in calculus or an A+ in calculus, you get the right to vote, and you get all the rights that come along with that. So I wanted to really drill down and think really carefully about that. So if I think about sort of breaking it down a little bit, the things we have to do are we have to vote people into office, right? We have to make wise decisions around that. When they are in office, there might be policies coming up where we might want to weigh in on them, and that gets back to the paper, perhaps, reading the news. We also vote on referendums or referenda in our towns. And then also, once you register for vote, you serve on a jury, right? That's actually something that you can be called to serve on a jury. So there's mathematical demands for all of these things. And I put a little asterisk here because I think part of us weighing in on issues is not just thinking about our own self-interest, it's also about thinking about others, right? If we want our collective democracy to be healthy, we need to not just think about ourselves, but also how the impact is on others. So I think that that's a big part of it, is can I think about both myself in context and sort of the impact on this broader range. All right, so let's play around a little bit with some of this. I'm gonna hit 4 different things. I'm gonna talk about wisely weighing in, so this newspaper idea. I'm gonna talk about issues for the collective good. What are maybe some mathematics when we're thinking about the collective good? What would that entail? I'm going to talk about representation. So this one is a little more subtle, but does the system hear my voice and vote? Right? And if it doesn't, then we need to change our system because we value collectively the idea that everybody has a say in what's going on and everyone's vote and voice counts. And then last but not least, I'm going to talk about sort of the math of jury duty and what that might look like. So I'm dabbling in a few places. I will try to make it as straightforward and coherent as possible. But again, these are newer ideas for me, so I'm playing with them a little bit. So part of this is I really welcome the conversation that comes along with it and what was maybe sparked for you along the way as I try to start playing in the sandbox and see what we can build. All right. So the first set of ideas is wisely weighing in as a citizen, okay? And I'm going to think about a citizen reading the newspaper. So for this, I actually started reading the paper more systematically about 2 months ago, just trying to think about, okay, what are the demands on me as a citizen? What do I really have to process and be thinking about to do this? So this is just from a few weeks, and I'm sorry in the back if you can't see it. These are all different headlines that sort of come up. So cities and towns could face $24 million hit from minimum wage hike. Connecticut's rapid loss of urban trees could have long-term consequences. State Dems tax the wealthy. Progressive lawmakers join national push to redistribute wealth. The third case of measles in Connecticut is confirmed. So all of these things have some level of mathematics in them, some mathematical basis for them. So I'm going to take a subset of them right now, and I'm just going to explore a few of them. These ideas about making wise decisions, which really as a citizen means me offering my opinion when I feel compelled to do that to my state rep or whoever it might be. I have to come to an opinion on an issue, and then I need to offer that to my state rep. To make sure this was true, that state reps listen to people, I actually met with our state rep and had a conversation with him about, okay, so how do you get the voters' voices once you're sort of already in office? And he did say they literally sometimes count emails. Like they literally count emails if you have 50 for one position and 20 for another. And he is always trying to think about what his constituents want. So the degree to which we can communicate that, it seems to really matter. All right, so as I was thinking about these issues and weighing in on something, it seemed to me like this huge daily dose of would you rather. I don't know if people have used that in their classroom, but that's really what seems to be going on. So would you rather be taxed at 5% and have these services, or taxed at 7% and have these services? Would you rather have something happen with urban development in this realm or in this realm? So it seems to be this huge thing with would you rather. So let's take a look at some of them. I will get into an example, but I just wanted to frame it up front. It seems to me that a lot of these issues, mathematically, if I go back to the mathematical demands, they involve a level of uncertainty. When you're reading the paper, when you're reading these issues, there's estimates involved, there's projections involved, there's a fair amount of uncertainty in it. A second feature seems to be that they attend to different levels of analysis. So sometimes we're looking at this constituent group, sometimes we're looking at this constituent group, sometimes we're looking at a 2-year projection, sometimes we're looking at a 10-year projection. So it seems like that's a really important part of these issues. And then the third thing that seems really important about these would you rather kind of things is that math doesn't decide the answer. Math tends to inform the answer, but our priorities and what we like really seem to more play in as much. So I'm thinking of would you rather with 2 swimming pools, right? One with like a deep end that's rectangular and one that's like an above ground and circular, right? So they might have about the same volume of water, but maybe I like to dive a lot, right? So that priority comes over the mathematical analysis of the volume. And the same kind of thing seems to happen here, that mathematics is going to inform some of what we do, but it's not going to decide the answer for us. So I think these features are important, and I'll do an example. And then we can think about, so what does that mean for what we're trying to do in schools, right? Like that's eventually where we kind of want to get to. So, all right, should the legislature increase the tax on investment income of the wealthiest? That was a proposal recently, all right? So should they or should they not? If I'm a person trying to figure this out, what would that look like? So that's one, these are just questions that would come up. Should the minimum wage be increased to $15 an hour? That's another one that's been coming up, the pros and the cons of that. A town referendum, do you support the dollars for school renovation? You vote directly on that. That doesn't go through the state rep, okay? Analyzing those issues. And the one I'll talk about is, do you support tolls in Connecticut? So that's a big one on the table right now. Okay, people have opinions, I can see, right? So, all right, so what does it look like to sort of analyze these things? Well, would you rather, right? So what does this look like for us? So as we think about issues like this, the proposal is to install tolls along routes and highways 84, 91, 95, and part of Route 15, okay? So, background, Connecticut has 300 bridges and many, many miles of road that need repair. There is not enough in the standard budget to cover the cost. So Connecticut needs to raise money to go towards this. Okay? This is a collective good for everybody. The state can get a little bit of federal money for it, but we're still going to have to bring up a fair amount of money. All right, so the analysis of a citizen, it could go something like this. First of all, does it increase my cost? And that may depend on where I live. So I don't travel much on those roads. It doesn't really increase a lot for me. Okay, I'm a worker living in the western part of the state. Maybe every single day now I'm going to be hit with this. So we could make a decision just based on our complete personal interest. Does it impact me or not? Does it make me pay more money or not? But that would maybe not be the most responsible thing to do, right? We need to be thinking a little bit more long term. We might also think about, is it going to help the state enough? Does this really raise the revenue that we want it to raise? We might think about, is it fair? And that's baked into our democracy. And there's going to be a lot of implications of that for math. So is it fair? Is it reasonable to ask people who are driving to work every day, who already are taxed through gas taxes and all these other things, is it fair to ask them to pay a little bit more for this? Well, if you don't, what's the alternative? So we're thinking about all these different things. Does it overstress one group over the others? Well, does it overstress people in the western part of the state? Well, yeah, there's more of those highways over there. Well, at the same time, they use the roads more, it's more populated over there. Maybe it is fair. I'm not sure. Oh, and then we have out-of-state drivers. Okay, well, they're paying part of it. Is that reasonable? So there's all these things to consider. So it impacts any driver, and the estimates are 30 to 40% of the revenue will come from out-of-state drivers. So I'm not going to have us go all the way into the mathematics and sort of formulate our opinions on it. I'm trying to lay out the space of this kind of question. All right, so going back to this idea, reading the newspaper and trying to get your head around it and deciding if you're for this or against it requires you looking at the numbers they've given you, realizing there's some uncertainty in them. It requires thinking of different levels of analysis. Am I thinking about myself? Am I thinking about the collective? Am I thinking about the west part of the state, the workers? Who am I thinking about? And then the idea that math might inform this when I think about the cost to people or the amount it will raise in taxes, but it's not going to decide it. We might just decide we really need these roads. This is a top priority. It's for the economic benefit of the state that we have a good infrastructure. And so, you know, a high cost is okay for this, even if it taxes me personally. So there's all these things to sort of weigh. And that brings me to the question of, are we sort of doing this in our math classes? Is this the nature of the mathematical work that we have students do? And if not, do they get it from somewhere else? And if not, is it something that if we do what we do traditionally, as we have been doing, is it something where then they can walk out of our classrooms and do it on their own? Or is it something that you really have to work with the tools while you're in math class to be able to make this happen? I tend to think students aren't going to do this on their own based on a standard math training without wrestling with these ideas and working them through. They aren't necessarily going to be able to know how to attack these problems, how to think about the different levels, how to model them out. Along with this, I want to throw in a different role of math. I've talked about the idea that you have to think about the individual and the collective, right? So the analysis we have to do has to think about the individual and collective, but more importantly, I'm going to argue that math is one of the few ways we can really get our heads around the collective. So there's no way for me to understand our society with 3,000 miles of country or across the country, and so many million people. I can't necessarily get my head around it. I can get my head around personally who's in my space and what I see in my daily life, and that may or may not be enough. So for example, I remember the first time I heard somebody say about 50% of the people in the United States do not pay federal income tax. And I thought, that's not fair. That didn't seem right. Right? When I first heard that, that didn't make sense to me. I thought, that's a lot of people not paying federal income tax. I thought that was kind of part of what we do as citizens, right? Well, it doesn't seem fair until you can try and get your head around the whole United States. So I'm very sorry, this is small. I was expecting it to be a little larger, so I'll do my best to sort of narrate. This shows the percent of wealth by group of people in the United States. So it shows right here, the bottom 50% of people have 1.2% of the wealth. Oh, okay, I'm fine with you not paying taxes now, right? That seems really fair, that if 50% of the people control only 1.2% of the wealth, well then it makes perfect sense we wouldn't be taxing them. In fact, it would be unfair to tax them. So my big point is that mathematics gives us a sense of the whole and gives us a sense beyond this. We can't understand groups and large quantities without having some level of statistics. So I wanted to tuck that in as another really important piece of math. So as we're thinking about fairness, we have to be thinking about others. And as we think about others, we have to have some sense of them, which often has to be information come to us in some sort of quantifiable way in order to deal with ends beyond what we can personally experience and connect with. So our thinking about fairness is informed by our understanding of others, and math contributes to that as well. All right. Going back to the idea of math not deciding an issue, that math informs an issue. When I was talking with the state rep, he said, every budget is a value statement. Every budget is really around priorities and what cost-benefit analysis we're willing to do and things of that nature. And I just thought it was a great quote that I wanted to share with you. So when you're looking at a state budget, it's not completely a mathematical document, although that's all you'll see is a bunch of numbers, but it's something that's informed by our priorities, our sense of fairness, our sense of taking care of the collective, and also our individual interests. All right, so that's one big piece of the mathematics that I think is needed for citizenship. All right, that kind of ability to analyze the would you rather situations with an eye on the collective. All right, good so far? Ready for some more? Okay, all right. So, I want to make one connection. You know how I gave Sandbox 2, the individual one, where everyone's sort of looking out for, my family and things like that? The analysis that I think you do that I just talked about, I think is incredibly linked to Sandbox 2. I think the idea of uncertainty and probabilities and projecting out a few years, things like that, I think is the exact same kinds of thinking that I have to go through. So I wanted to make that connection, in part because I'm not sure that kids are going to get really excited about taxes and tolls, but they might get a little bit more excited about car loans and things like that. So there's some of the thinking that we could do in a different realm if that content doesn't grab them right away. All right, so math for issues about the collective good. So this is the second space I want to think about. Sometimes things don't come with price tags. There's always a price tag embedded somewhere, but they don't always come with price tags. So I want to think about issues like this. Should you immunize your child? What should the state's policies be? Right? And there's been a lot in the paper recently around measles and a little bit around chickenpox. So that's something about the collective good. Facts, if we think about this situation, after 2 doses of the vaccine, 97% are immune from the measles. Okay. So the general rule of thumb is that you need 95% of a group to be immune in order to have that effect. You could have an outbreak if you don't have at least 95% of people getting the immunizations they need. So there are 3 confirmed cases in Connecticut this year, and nationwide it's up from last year, and in fact the highest rates we've had since 2000. There's more measles this year than has been in a couple of decades. All right, in Connecticut we have 96.5% of school children are up to date. Now some students can't do the measles vaccination because of some immunity issues on themselves. It's not healthful for them to do it. And then the other way you might not do it, the medical exemption, and then there's the religious exemptions are the 2 ways to do that. So then you need to decide and think about, okay, for my child, or what am I going to advocate here? What do I think I need to do for my family? But then also, what do I advocate as the state's policy? And in fact, when all this came out, there were a lot of Freedom of Information Act's requests to the health department to say, we would like to know more. I want to know what's going on at my school. So this seems pretty good, right? So 96.5%, apparently we're one of the higher states in the country in terms of that. But then, did anybody see the data? They put it out in the paper? Yeah. So we all know averages, right? So what matters, not the 96.5% in the state are immune, but in the pocket in which you live are 96.5% of the people immune, right? And it turns out that some schools were as low as 63% with the vaccination rate. So there were lots of pockets, and parents wouldn't necessarily know that. Okay, so now we have this tension between the good of the collective, and then we also have this tension with individual rights, and do I have the right to decide for myself and my beliefs and things like that. So here, again, we're in a little bit of a mucky place. So what kind of things can we do with this? What's important about this kind of work? Well, I think this is an issue that mathematics helps us understand a little bit better. So one thing is modeling the spread of disease, right? If I'm really gonna get into my mind and understand, I have to understand how disease spreads. Why is it that at a certain threshold, a disease can sort of die out and it won't be contagious beyond a local space? And why is it that things can sort of run up and create an epidemic? So there's some wonderful ways you can do that. This happens to be, I pulled the game of life to have here, which is a wonderful modeling situation where you set initial conditions and you set rules, and then you play it out and see what happens. So we could click and say, okay, these are people that have been, don't have immunity or have been exposed, and then you can run this model and sort of see what happens. And you can set different initial conditions. You could say, what if 75% of people are immunized? What is that going to look like? You could say, what if 95% of people are immunized? What does that look like? And you can see that in certain conditions, you keep it local, and in other conditions, this whole screen would turn yellow, and you would have a lot of people in trouble. So these are just examples of the mathematics that are involved. In this case, mathematics helps us understand a situation. And I wanted to do another example of the collective good. Okay, so that's one example of collective good. Another example is, are we doing our fair share in terms of climate change? Right? That's another big one. Doesn't come directly with a price tag, but are we doing our fair share in terms of combating global warming? And I'm actually going to share with you an example that I used with my pre-service teachers many years ago that is from earlier 2000s. So in the early 2000s, in 1999, there was a Kyoto Treaty that was meant to help address greenhouse gases. And the countries involved said, we agree to go back to our 1990 levels of greenhouse gas emissions, and then from there, we're going to actually reduce them even further. So that was the agreement. The United States, being the United States, we were in on the talks, but we never ratified the treaty. We said we're not going to do it. So, okay, fine. So if we don't do that, what are we doing? And are we doing our fair share? Are we doing something comparable to what other countries are doing? So this is what the United States decided to do. This is from the EPA's website at the time. The United States is committed to reducing the greenhouse gas intensity of the American economy by 18% over the 10-year period from 2002 to 2012. This initiative puts America on path to slow the growth of greenhouse gas emissions and, as the science supports, to stop and then reverse that growth. All right? So we've decided, I'll define for you in a second, this greenhouse gas intensity, and we're going to reduce it over an 18-year period of time, okay, over a 10-year period of time by 18%. Are we doing our fair share? I don't know yet, right? I need to know a little bit more. All right, well, let's see. So the greenhouse gas intensity is the ratio of the emissions that we produce measured in CO2 equivalents over our GDP. All right, so it's a ratio, and we're going to reduce that ratio over 10 years by 18%. So my question to you is, are we doing our fair share? So go ahead and talk to your neighbor, just get your head in it as much as you can. Are we doing our fair share? This is a good idea. All right, well, I say that. So think about that GGI. How would that GGI go down to 18%? I have a sub-prompt here if you want. Okay, let me hear some ideas. Are we doing our fair share? What do people think? Are we doing our fair share? Someone start us off. I heard a no. Crystal, was that you?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay, go ahead, Crystal. Why not?
Well, mostly a question.
Yes.
Because it wasn't clear. Were we saying we were going to reduce by 18% over the total of 10 years, or is that 18% per year for 10 years?
It's total, 18% total.
So 1.8% per year if we were going to.
Sure.
Okay, well that's nothing.
Okay.
1.8% of a whole lot of stuff is still a whole lot, is barely anything.
Okay, great. So it seems pretty insufficient, but they built it up 10-year period of time, 18%. It makes it sound kind of good, but when you think about it, it's a little bit shy of maybe impressive. So, all right. Anything else? Any other reasons why we might not be doing our fair share? Yes.
The GDP increases, the emission stays the same, and may reduce it by just that amount. I don't know how fast the GDP would grow, but the numerator stays the same, the denominator gets a lot bigger. It's going to reduce.
Spoken like a true math teacher, right? If the numerator
I'm
stays
full of
the
math
same,
teachers, so it's okay.
it's beautiful. That's exactly right. If the numerator stays the same and the denominator increases, our ratio can go down, and we've done nothing. We've done even worse than only 1.8%, right? So we've created this measurement that is pretty empty. Now, to be fair, you could say we didn't want to hurt our economic growth by having to deal with dealing with the emissions. So it was a measure put in place so that we wouldn't have to constrain our economic growth in any way. So if the economy goes up, we're willing to have more emissions, but we're not going to sort of tamp them down a little bit more.
But I would argue
Yes,
doing
good.
nothing
Yeah.
could impact climate so that it's going to have an impact in the long run. So
Absolutely, absolutely. So are we doing our fair share? Probably not on this one, right? So we have this nice ratio that can go down without us doing nothing. It actually turned out that some analyses showed that the greenhouse gas emissions just with cleaner technologies had actually reduced about 18% over the previous 20 years anyway, just because we got better and better about cars and things like that. So even more sort of empty in that way. Okay, so what's the point here? It's middle school content, but you have to think. You really have to think. You have to analyze and figure out what's going on and be a critical consumer of something that you're trying to be sold. All right, so are we doing our fair share? Maybe not on this one. All right, so this is the slide I showed before about sort of the features of the mathematics that I talked about with the would you rather kinds of problems. It's pretty similar with this kind of stuff, but I'd say there's an even more emphasis on assumptions when we're thinking about the collective good, about the assumptions people are making and sensitivity to some of those assumptions. And then I'd say that, again, math really it informs it, but it does not decide it. And we have to always remember information comes from a point of view. That's part of it, right? As our critical consumers. All right. So those are two of the big spaces I see math playing out in a democracy. I'm going to talk about two more now, and hope you aren't overwhelmed by the end. But this one's around voting and representation. This, as I mentioned before, is baked into our democracy. We have a system that expects every person who's 18 that wants to vote to have a voice, okay? And that's very different from other societies. And we expect that to be fair on some level, right? So what is the mathematics that plays out here? So I'm gonna do these examples more quickly than not. You're probably really familiar with the first one, but I think it's interesting context. This has just come up this year. Ranked choice voting strategy plotted was the title of the article, but it's around changing our voting thing. Right now, voting schemes. Right now, we do plurality. Okay, whoever gets the most votes wins. That person could have 45% of the vote, another candidate 40, and then people do write-ins or another candidate 10%, and the person with 45% wins. Okay, so that's our plurality. It's not majority, it's just do you have the most, all right? Now, we've seen in elections that sometimes if you have two candidates that are similar, they split that vote, and that the third candidate sort of will win, even though maybe more people kind of support the ideas of the other two candidates, but they split the vote. So a lot of places are talking about, should we instead do ranked choice voting? And so I just want to make people aware of that. And is Connecticut next? So Connecticut earlier this year passed a House bill on ranked choice voting, and it's a study bill that was creating a task force to decide what that would look like in Connecticut and whether that's maybe a good idea. So that's pretty interesting to think about. And I don't know if that would go to a referendum or if that would be just through the state legislature, but that's something that we all might have to weigh in on. Do we think that's a good idea or not? Is that a better way for me to be represented? Is that a more fair way for me to be represented? So I have an example that I'm not going to go through, but There's plenty of examples on the web as well that show one candidate could win if it's just a plurality vote, and a different candidate could win if you do the ranked choice voting. Because what happens is they'll do an instant runoff. You'll do an instant runoff, and then for whichever candidate had the lowest number of votes, that candidate is no longer in the running, and you take their second choice. So depending on where those second choices go, that will create the winner. And sometimes that's different from the winner you would get with just the first, only a single vote. So keep your eyes on it. It's something we might be talking about soon. Maine actually just did that for their congressional districts even. So this is a question that we would need to consider. On the national level, thinking about voting, we have the electoral college system, right? And there's a push for some people to say, no, that's not the best way. We should do a direct vote. Well, there are pros and cons to that. So is that really what we want to do? Whose voice matters in that? And then there's always the issue of districting around creating congressional districts, which actually I'll go into right now because I think this one's fascinating. So gerrymandering is related to this districting issue. Are people familiar with gerrymandering and the debates going on? So people that had my class last year, I think I'm nodding. So this is all around how do we apportion a state into districts where the people there are voting for one representative, the people here are voting for another representative, the people voting here are for another representative. Well, you would think they could just draw a bunch of straight lines and it would be fine. Well, every 10 years they have to redraw it because the census comes out and then they decide how many people should be in each district, and you have to be into some crazy number, like within, I've heard very low, but at least within 100. Like you cannot have your districts vary by more than 100 people. So you're sort of dividing everything up. So let's just take an example so we can get our head in the math. You get the idea, I like to do the math. So let's imagine that this is a state and there's 25 blocks in the state. And you can see we have our competing red and blue. And if you count it up, red has 16 of the 25, let's call them votes, and blue has 9 of the 25. Okay, so that's a 64% in favor of sort of red, 36% in favor of blue. Now, if districts comprise 5 squares, so let's say they were apportioned so that they're getting 5 districts out of this, can you draw districts so that blue gets more districts? Is that possible? I'll let your brain noodle on that for a minute. Could blue get more districts? They clearly have fewer votes. Could blue get more districts? Yeah, people have visualized a little bit. All right, I'll show you one solution. One would be to, notice you gotta get 3, right? You gotta have 3 of the 5 being blue. So there's no rules around the lines. That's what's the fun part about this. I could go here, I put all the red together, because it's winner take all. Doesn't matter if it's 3-2 or 5-0, so I might as well let red win one with 5-0, because now I've used up their votes over there. All right, I've got another one that's 5 reds, okay? So now I can use my blues to win 2 other districts. And blue wins, right? Even though they have only a third of the popular vote, they end up with 60% of the representation. This, to a degree, is legal so far, and they're actually working at the Supreme Court level right now to figure out when is it too far? When is it to the point where you've been violating my First Amendment and I don't now have a voice? You've actually squashed my voice. That's the issue on the table. Just for fun, can you do it to maximize red? What would red's max be? Okay, John's intuition is all. Can you make it happen? Is it possible to really get all?
If you have 5 districts, you get 6, you can average 3.2.
Okay.
That's more than, that's going to be more than that, so you can do it.
Great. Okay, so mathematically, you have over 3, an average of 3 per district. Then the question is, can you draw? Because some states have rules about them being contiguous at least, even though they can be crazy shaped. So just for fun here, if I go across, I can have my reds win those 3 districts. And then, well, I just got to split up strategically the blues in those 2 rows. So now I've won all 5. All right. So now blue had a third of the vote, right? But they get none of the representation. So a big mathematical question is when does this redistricting go too far to end up implanting sort of a partisan bias that actually is now over the line, where we no longer have a fair representation of people's voices. All right, and this is just to show you, this is the one that's up at the Supreme Court. North Carolina, this is its districts, and then they put in, it's very small, but you can, they showed you by what percent the district was won. So this blue spot was won by 46%. This one was won by 40%. This one was won by a margin of 48%. Okay? The red ones, this was won by 0.3%, 11%, 5%, 14%. Overall, for all the votes, 50% went red, 48% went blue, but of the seats, 9 of the 13 seats went red. So this is one of the cases in front of the Supreme Court. So did they sort of compact the blue? It's called packing. Did they pack blue people all together so that they could kind of concentrate their vote and let them just win a few? And then the rest of the blues were then therefore more diluted, so they could sort of be outpowered by the red balance in those areas. All right, so this is the mathematics, always fun stuff. This is the mathematics of thinking about fair representation, okay? I think it's a little different than the mathematics we talked about with the would you rather, right? Because mathematics is the driving question here, right? With the other one, math was informing. In this case, math is the driving question. Is it fair? How do I measure this? How do I know? It's based on some level of shared values, which we don't always have in our society, but when it comes to the idea of representation, we sort of share that. And the mathematical analysis informs this to a high degree. This gets in deep, but there's all these things around the efficiency gap, this idea of Monte Carlo Markov chains is one way they're trying to show it now. So the math can get in deep, but it's very much a mathematical question. All right, let's see, how am I doing on time? We're doing okay. Ready for juries? Am I doing okay, John? What's that?
I could hear a lot of this. So
John says I have another
I'm
hour.
not the right person. I'm not the right person.
Okay.
That's not a fair question.
Okay, that wasn't fair. Is there a mathematical basis of that fairness, or just not fair? All right, so let's look at juries. So this is the other thing. You're registered to vote. You can be called to a jury. All right. This is a huge place where I really, really, really would prefer a group of math teachers to be my jury, my peers, and I will, if I ever go up to a trial, I'm going to insist on a jury of my peers, literally math teachers. We do not have the numeracy in the United States to have people regularly analyzing and consuming statistical evidence in a courtroom and making a good decision, right? It's a danger. Actually, Mary Trexler's husband, who's a law professor and an applied mathematician, is somebody who looks at this and actually trains lawyers to do the cross-examining mathematically, because lawyers aren't necessarily trained to do that cross-examining mathematically. They don't necessarily have that background. All right, so this one's on us. I don't know who else is doing this. This one's going to be on us as math teachers. So let's look at a couple of examples. O.J. Simpson trial. Okay, some of you in the room lived through it like I did. Some of you weren't born yet. That's okay. But you probably know who O.J. is. So this was a trial where O.J. Simpson, the big question was he involved with the murder of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson? Okay. Literally opening arguments for this tried to put forth this idea. He had actually been known to have battered her. That was documented through police reports. And the assertion of the prosecutors were, look, he has this history. It makes it kind of more likely that he actually was the murderer. His defense attorneys took a different tack, trying to say that that was irrelevant. The idea that he was known to be an abuser did not matter at all for for whether he murdered her or not, that it was irrelevant. It was such a tiny amount, it was irrelevant. So let me talk you through that. So you're on the jury, okay? You've got to consume this evidence. All right, so the data is that 3.5 million women are hit by domestic partners each year. That's scary in and of itself. We won't even talk about that. That's the data, though. Of those, 1 in 2,500 of these women are murdered by their abusers. Okay, they're domestic abusers. 1 in 2,500. The defense, said, well, that's 0.04%. That's tiny, right? 0.04%. So it's irrelevant. If only 0.04% of the women who are abused are murdered by their husbands, it's completely, not husbands, whatever, domestic partners, then it's completely irrelevant. And in the opening arguments, there's this famous quote from it saying, "A slap is not a prelude to a homicide." And that was what the defense was saying. All right. Is that the right inference? It seems like it should matter, right? The prosecution didn't even cross-examine this argument. Should I, oops, okay. Should I let you talk for a minute about it? Go ahead, ponder. So, is that the right question is my other thing. Is it the right inference? Is it the right question?
Right,
Okay, let me pull you back. Anybody want to gander a thought for this? Yeah, go ahead.
So you talk about when you go the other way, like.
What if you go the other way? Okay.
It's around 4%, but the vast majority of people who are murdered by their partners, like they didn't just wake up and decide they were gonna kill their partner one day, like they were abused before that.
Okay. Okay, so what if you go the other way? What if you start with the idea somebody is murdered? Maybe it's the idea behind going the other way. Okay. Good. So is this the right question? It's not the right question, right? This question says 1 in 2,500 answers the question, what's the probability that a man murdered his domestic partner given that he previously battered her? That's a prediction of the future. Something happened. She was murdered. So the relevant question is, what's the probability that a man murdered his domestic partner given that he previously battered her? That's a different question. So let's look at that. All right. So I've tried to change the color of these folks here, so to show that let's go out of 100,000 people, that 0.04% rate would give you 40 women who had been battered who were then also murdered. Okay, so that's 40 of that 100,000. I'm just doing rates now, 40 out of 100,000. But that's not everybody. Unfortunately, we have a murder rate of about 1 in 20,000. That was from the 1990s, the year that this was done. So that is another 5 people. 5 women would be murdered. So now to Amber's point, well, think about it. The vast majority of women, if there's a history of battering, most of those women were battered or were murdered by their partner. That's what's going on. So the math of it is, the probability now is the number of murdered by abusers relative to the number murdered, and we end up with 40 over 40 plus 5. And it's all proportional, so I can just do it on this 100,000. That's 89%. Whoa. Orders of magnitude off our 0.04%. But that argument was never cross-examined in that courtroom. Right? So dealing with evidence and understanding probabilistic stuff is very challenging. And our brains are not well suited for it. We don't like to think about infinite possibilities or large numbers. We're much more about experience. Okay, so serving on a jury, that's a little bit about it. I'll just throw out there that there's the idea of DNA cases come up with juries, the idea of what's a preponderance of evidence, all these things are mathematical. All right, this is just a nice quote related to dealing with statistics. Society needs to prioritize educating juries in the language of statistics, otherwise juries will be forever at the mercy of convincing yet potentially invalid testimony. Courtroom decisions should be based on facts and probabilities, not manipulation by a skilled prosecutor or defense attorney. Right? So there's a strong role for mathematics in our society in very consequential ways. All right, so let's see. I'll just make the link. I think the idea, some of this statistical stuff is very related to that. Remember that individual sandbox number 2? If you're making decisions about your health, interpreting test results, all that stuff, that's the same kind of statistical thinking. All right, so this kind of thinking shows up elsewhere. All right, so math for citizenship. We've journeyed through these 4 spots. We've talked a little bit about weighing in on policies, about when we think about things for the collective good. We've talked about representation and how mathematics plays a role in understanding that, and the math of jury duty. So these are 4 spaces that I think are quite relevant to this idea of math for citizenship. Okay, so what do we do with this? Well, as citizens, what are we thinking about? What is math really used for? It's used for issues of fairness. It's used for issues of trying to reach our goal when we decide something is fair or that we want to pursue something. Math can tell us whether we're reaching that standard. Discrimination cases, always statistical, right? It can't be just an individual bias against one person. You have to show something systematic, right? To understand aspects of issues related to our collective good, and to engage in critical conversations, questioning where these statistics come from, interpreting statistics, deciding what the inferences are. So there's a lot of mathematics. Just, I'm only talking about the citizenship piece here, right? In that little corner of the world. So what's the mathematics? That's what we use math for, right? This is what we're doing with math as citizens. The purpose is what we're trying to pursue. And then I was thinking about, so what math is that? What is the math that we need? This goes back to the first question I asked. I think we need, a ton of modeling. We should really have everybody facile with Excel. That seems to be incredibly important for understanding, okay, what happens in 2 years and 10 years. I wrote extreme skills with ratios, proportions, and percents. Those extreme drinks, and it's like, yeah, this is going to jazz me up. I feel like we really, really, really need students to absolutely understand those things in great depth. And some other things here. But I think even more importantly than content, I pulled out the math practice standards and I said, well, let me think about the 1 or 2 that we most need for citizenship. You need all 8. So do we need to make sense of problems and persevere? Yes. Do we need to reason abstractly and quantitatively? Absolutely. You have to go from these concepts, ideas, and things linked down to the particular case and back up, constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others. Modeling with mathematics, huge. Using appropriate tools strategically. How do I make sense of this? How do I look at a 10-year range? Our calc tools don't let us do that unless it's a very well-defined problem, right? Attending to precision. This is huge in this kind of work because we don't have precision in so much of what we begin with that we have to understand, okay, let me change the initial conditions a little and see if I get the same outcome. If I don't, then I really need to think about whether my model is going to give me some reasonable answers or not. Looking for and making use of structure. That's actually what you did when you analyzed the GGI index. And then this one a little bit less, but I think that's linked in when you're doing sort of anything over time, right? Looking for regularity and repeated reasoning. All right, so possibilities. What could we do with this? Well, I think we need a class called Law and Math, right? That would be maybe appropriate. Maybe we need another course, Civics and Math. This one's called Argument-Driven Mathematics, right? So we don't necessarily need Algebra 1, but we need to put it in its purposeful context. We need to say, what are people doing with mathematics, and we gotta let them do it. And so these are just a few ideas. The last thing that we want to do is teach them, this comes from my husband, his idea, because he's a social studies teacher, the idea that we're sometimes teaching them hammer 1 and hammer 2, right? Here's a hammer. Let's teach you how to use the hammer. Okay, hammer 1, you learn to nail something into a board. In hammer 2, you learn to take the nails out, right? But you've never built a shed. You've never built a fence. And so it's the use and the purposeful use of the hammer that we don't let students do. We just let them learn that technique. It's a good first step. But unless you put it in context and you put it in use, you're not going to develop that disposition to use it. You're not going to understand the value of it. You're not going to understand, I've got this toolkit, what should I use when, and be able to interpret your results well. So I'm putting these out here to start the conversation. I don't really expect that, we're going to get a course exactly like this anytime soon, but I think it's a possibility. I wanted to just show that some of these ideas mesh with a lot of other initiatives people are passionate about, people I know in this room are passionate about. I already mentioned the catalyzing high school, change in high school math that we think we're not quite doing right by a bunch of the kids in high school. There are kids sitting in Algebra 2 being tortured by 135 hours of Algebra 2. The teacher's being tortured too. And, I feel like it's like my French training, right? I've got the colors. I can't even ask to go to the bathroom. I've got the colors, and I can say, let's go to the beach. Okay, that's like it. For hundreds of hours. So something's wrong there. And if that's what's happening as an outcome, what else could we do with those 135 hours that would be a little bit more productive? This meshes with the state regs on high school graduation. I've mentioned the idea that if we're going towards STEM or 9 credits of STEM, that might open some space for interdisciplinary work, right? And I think also if we prioritize the rigor of the practices, that's a really good place to start thinking about designing a course around. What if I put forward the purposes and the practices and organize things that way? Social justice math, I bet you could see some links in there. Humanizing math and ethnomath. This is the use of math. That's what ethnomath is. It's studying other cultures' use of math. Well, how are we using math? How do we use math for gerrymandering and all kinds of things like that? 21st century skills, it's right in the line with that. And it addresses questions that we all know students ask all the time. Why do we need this? Well, it's a much easier answer when you're talking about math for citizenship, because you're guaranteed that when they hit 18, it's not that they didn't go to a STEM career, so this piece of your curriculum didn't quite mesh for them. Every single student has that opportunity to participate in society. So it addresses that question really nicely. Although the need for a mathematics education has traditionally been cast in terms of economic need and national defense, mathematics is increasingly needed to understand the world today and fully engage in a democratic society. So I see this as an invitation to sort of take up that charge. I think we're in a time of great flux, political flux, economic flux, all kinds of things going on. We're really thinking about what makes a purposeful, good education. How do we do right by all our students that we haven't done right by so far? So we need to take on that challenge, and we need to think about this opportunity that we have in Connecticut in particular as people sort of organize around rethinking high school math and think about what would I want to do with this 9 credits of STEM? Can I innovate? What can I do? And maybe move it forward. So thinking about those next steps. So I wanted to start that conversation, hope people engage it a little bit and see if we can come up with something that we think is productive. So thank you very much for playing in the sandbox with me.
Okay, before we get started with dinner, it was a wonderful presentation. I'm really interested to hear some of the comments from some of the tables, as particularly in ties to high school and college are obvious. But what I'm really interested to hear what the elementary people have to say, what the middle school have to say. I think it's very relevant to everybody. So before we start with dinner, I first of all want to make sure we had 6 kind of last minute registrations, and I had all the seating worked out perfectly, and all of a sudden I got a jack. I know I made people per table, and I had to move some people. So I think I probably made a couple mistakes along the way. So if I did, please let me know. If you're not, I'll try to resolve it before you actually have dinner. Because when you have dinner, you want to, I'm sure, be talking with people that have common experiences that you have. So I will do my best to fix that right now. Doreen is our event coordinator. She'll call tables up to dinner. I think the buffet looks like it's probably ready. Is it Doreen? There's Doreen. Doreen, you're all set. So you call tables, and we'll get started with eating. But please, if you're not at a table, then you should be. We have elementary table is 10, middle school is 8 and 9, high school is 5, 6, and 7, central office 3 and 4. 1 is Megan's table, and 2 is Colin's.
And just before we head up, I just want to let you know that there are some reflection questions on your table to consider during your eating time, and we will be having a little discussion about these questions.